Hi guys, it's Kelly and I am back with another video. Today's video is featuring the Simon Says Stamp and Colorado Craft Company STAMPtember exclusive. It is called Work of Art. This one is called Love Art, and I actually used that one for last year's STAMPtember video that I made. This one is the one I'm going to use this time around, and this is called Paint Town. And we are going to be creating two cards, both with the same style of scene, but one is going to be a one-layer card, so all flat, and one is going to be done with dies. Basically, whichever style of scene card makes your heart happy, we are going to show you how to make that. So the one we're starting with first is the one-layer card. When you're creating a one-layer card, and I have lots of videos on this. Side note, if you don't know, STAMPtember, there's an exclusive set. Once it's sold out, it's gone. It's in stock right now. It also has there's a bundle with the stamps and the dies or just the stamp. I'm using just the stamps. So if you're trying to recreate this card, you don't need the dies, but you can obviously get them, but those always typically sell out first. So if you're watching, pause it and go buy them if that's what you want. Okay, moving on. So when you're stamping for a one-layer card, whatever you want to see all of, you want to stamp first. So in this case, we want to see all of our doggies. So we're going to stamp that first. This is Eclipse masking paper. This is my preferred option for masking paper. It just comes on a roll and I cut off as much as I need. But if you have something else that you like, that's totally fine too. And then we are going to fussy cut them and trim them out. I didn't worry so much about like the bottom of their little feet because I knew I wasn't going to be stamping over that. Really just more the top portion. And then here this is going to be my ground. So I'm just using, this is just pixie tape. I'm putting that in there so that it will be masked off from the ink blending to be the ground that we're going to create. So the premise for this is Colorado Crafts always has really great sentiments, and their STAMPtember set is no exception. So the one that I chose from the STAMPtember set says, "The most beautiful things in the world cannot be seen or touched. They are felt with the heart." And then the one from Paint the Town is, "Art washes away from the soul the dust of everyday life." So the whole idea behind the card is like these cute little animals are painting these like quotes on these little canvases that are in frames. So that's the whole idea. So this piece of paper, I'm a cheap chicken. If you've never been here before, I'm super cheap. What that little square is it is copy paper with repositionable adhesive on it. And my repositionable adhesive of choice is Tombow Mono Multi Glue. It's permanent when it's wet, and it's temporary. If you use it after it's dry, it stays tacky. So I cut that to be the size that I needed for my canvas and its little frame. And then I put that over the sentiment to protect it. I also still have my masks in place for my ground and both of my animals because this is my one-layer card. So I am putting in my wallpaper, which is this red. I thought that the red would be really, kind of like bright and fun since a lot of, the other things are going to be neutrals. And so I used candied apple, but then this is the first time I've ever used the lumberjack plaid because I didn't buy it when it first came out. I just recently got it in another one of my orders, and I love this. I don't even really like red, but this is like a nice, really like cool, like blue based red. Big fan of that one. And so I'm adding the darker colors, like this is aged mahogany, toward the bottom and keeping it light at the top, so that it looks like almost like when you're walking like in an art museum, how they have like the lights that are just above each of the exhibits. So it will look like there's a light, like it's lighter up top. But I didn't want it to be plain. I wanted it to be wallpapered. So I'm using the floral from that same STAMPtember set work of art. There's like a little rose floral, and I'm going to use that to create my wallpaper pattern, doing some tone on tone stamping. So originally I picked the cherry from Hero Arts. You could use the distress inks, but I'm going to be honest with you. In my experience, the distress inks are not great for stamping. Oxides are. Distress oxides stamp really well, but they do give a softer finish. They're just not as bright. So once I stamped across the top in cherry, I was like, I'm going to need a darker red for the bottom if I want to see any of the pattern. So I switched to cranberry. And you'll see that in the other card, I did not switch the inks. I started with the darker one to begin with. So where it's lighter, you can definitely see more of the pattern. But the key to having a pattern in the background, whether it's wallpaper or creating your own pattern piece, is the stamping off the edge. You have to stamp the background portions off the edge to give the feel that the illusion that the pattern continues on outside of the card. That's how we kind of set our scene. So here I'm stamping them, in the same pattern each time. The ones up top, the second row is kind of tucked up in there, and then the one on the bottom, has those same three. And then this one is done with the background. I have darker nail polish on, so I am using a little dye tool to help me pull off my masking, just so I don't scratch my nail polish onto my white surface and ruin my card that we've taken so much time to create. But then once you remove your mask, you just go in and color this like normal, which we will do here shortly. But first, we're going to work on the other card, just so when it comes to the coloring, we're on the same level. So just like with the card that is a one layer, we still have to plan out when we're using dyes just to make sure everything will fit in our scene. So I knew that I wanted to do one of the characters kind of sitting on top of the canvas, and I picked the little mouse for that. And then, are these hamsters? Are these guinea pigs? Does anybody know? Tell me. If you know, leave me a comment and tell me if they're hamsters or guinea pigs. I feel like they could be either. But so I did two of those on the bottom. For this wallpaper, I chose to do blue because I thought it would be a nice complement to the bright red, but also because blue is my boyfriend. In this case, we don't have to do any of the masking outside of just the ground. And even that, if you didn't want to mask it, you wouldn't have to. You could just cut another strip of white cardstock and color it and then just lay it over top. But because we're using dyes on top of our background, we can just go in and do it like we would do any other background without really having to worry about the sign, because those are going to be separate pieces. So this is a little bit, it's a lot sped up, but what I was going to say was this is a little bit more traditional of how I typically ink blend, doing 2 layers to get a really nice saturated blend. The reason I didn't have to do 2 layers with the first one is because that lumberjack red is so new. It's really it's so inky that it was pretty saturated right out the gate. This one is the Home Sweet Home set. That's also by Anita, Colorado Crafts. And matter of fact, I used this one in last year's, I'll have to link that video at the end. But anyway, it has these separate flower. One's a window, what do they call those? The flowers, a window box. One's a window box, one's a flower pot, and one's a hanging plant. And so I'm using that to stamp the wallpaper in this particular card. Something to note here is when you're stamping more than one, you do still want to alternate the way that you're stamping. So this one, I'm going to start in the middle now with this row and then kind of stamp off the edge on the right and left hand side. And that's so we're not consistently stamping the same one, like just a line of hanging baskets or a line of window boxes, because it helps break it up. It also makes it easier in case something doesn't stamp perfect or you're not exactly lined up when you're stamping a variety of different shapes. So now I removed the masking for that, set that aside, and we're going to stamp out our little characters for the die cut scene. And so, like I said, I chose 2 hamsters, 2 guinea pigs, 2 guinea hamsters, 2 hamster pigs. I don't know. I don't know what they are. They're adorable. I do know that, but I am not positive which one she was drawing here. And then the little mouse. So with all of these, including the sentiments, the quotes, I did stamp in a ink that was safe for alcohol markers, since I am going to be coloring with my Copics. So now on our 1-layer card, we do need to kind of frame this out. I find that it is easiest to use a T-square ruler, and I do it in pencil first. Yes, this means I do it twice, but you know that old saying, like measure twice, cut once? Same thing here. So I draw the lines twice, once in pencil, and then I go over it in a marker or a pen. You can use microns or a Copic multi-liner. These ones that I'm using are EK Success journaling pens, but they don't make them anymore. I'm just using them until they run out because, as previously stated, I am cheap. So here I'm just going in with my ruler. You do want to make sure when you're doing the pen portion that you don't accidentally draw the black line through your character, like my little dog's nose and like the top of his head and stuff. You do want to pay attention to that you don't draw right through that. But otherwise, you just, again, you're going around doing it the same way to create that frame around it. You do need to erase your pencil marks, especially if you're coloring with alcohol markers. I use an art gum eraser. Those are the best in my opinion. But you could use a white eraser as well, whatever you have that works. And then the reason that we have to erase that is because the alcohol markers will trap it. So it'll trap the lead from the pencil and you won't be able to get it up. So you need to make sure that you get all those lines erased before you start coloring. So for the ground, I kept things really simple. I just went with like a neutral, like medium-ish gray. I didn't, because we already had the pattern and the bright colors on the wall, I figured it was just nice and easy to do a neutral on the bottom. And for this one, I did a little bit of shadow underneath my characters and then got lighter as it kind of came away from the wall. I'm also going to add a little shading to our actual canvas because even though it's white, it wouldn't be just a flat white. Like there would still be some shadows. So I did just a line on the outside edges of C5 and then went right over top of that with the C1 and then blended out a little bit further I went over top of it with the C3 and then blended it out with the C1. The vast majority of it is still white, but that little bit of shading helps to give it some dimension. Now, because I want our canvas to look like it is mounted onto this frame versus sat inside the frame, I am doing the shading like down into the bottom left as if my light source was in the top right. And the reason that I'm choosing to do that is because I want the canvas to look like it is popped out from the frame versus sitting inside the frame. If I wanted the canvas to look like it was sitting inside the frame, then I would have added more shading to the actual canvas portion. But by adding that shading, that cast shadow to the frame portion, like just underneath the canvas, it helps it so that it looks like it is popped up. And then for this, I only use 3 colors. I'm going to use these same 3 colors of brown to color my little dog, one of my hamster pigs, and the what are they? Paintbrushes and the paintbrushes. So here, this is a little trick that you can use if you are doing a 1-layer card. I am going to add the shading underneath the frame so that it looks like it's casting a shadow onto the wall, like it's sticking out. But the little trick that you can use is if you are doing some ink blending and you find that your masks were not 100% lined up, which mine frequently are not, you can find a alcohol marker in the same color, like close, and fill in those lines, and nobody will ever know that they didn't match up. So here I'm using those same browns. I find using repeating colors, especially when you have something like multiple things going on in a scene, using repeating colors can really help keep it simple and so that it doesn't get too chaotic or too busy. So I'm repeating those same browns that I see in the frame for my little dog here. And again, I am coloring him as if my light source was on the right-hand side. So the left-hand side of him is going to be much darker. His little paint pot, I'm going to shade with the same ones that we used for the carpet, like the C1, 3, and 5. I decided to do the little water bucket blue. This is the true story, guys. The only reason I chose to do it blue is because I knew I used blue in the other background and I'm going to photograph them together. I have a real hard time with being matchy-matchy, especially when when I'm going to take the pictures together. So you could obviously color that any color that you would want, but I went with blue so that my cards would be matchy-matchy. And then for the paint, because obviously we stamped the sentiments in black, I made the paint black as well. And then the little, like the canister, I did a white label with black paint. And then just kind of the part that's, what do you even call that? Like where you would wipe off the paint is, and the paint part of the paint pot that the dog is holding obviously did black as well because that's the color of the paint. That was really hard to explain. Anyway, so for this dog, because I had used the cool grays for the ground, I'm going to use the warm grays for this dog. And again, I am coloring it as if the light source was in the top right-hand corner. So my shadows are going to be all down and to the left-hand side. You can make this, like when you're using the grays, you can make your dog as dark or as light as you would like. I went kind of middle of the road. Even though I went all the way out to a W7, I didn't add very much of it. And with alcohol markers, when you are layering them over top of each other, a lighter color will remove a little bit of the darker color. So even though I went in with that W7, he still ends up being fairly light. So that is pretty much that for what we're doing there. I did go back in. Anita draws her stamps in more of that like sketchy style. So I did go back in with a little bit of the W5 and I think the W3 and do just a little bit of texture on his fur. And that's just a bunch of little flicking strokes, but you do want to make sure you're going in the same direction that the lines are drawn. Otherwise it looks funny. Now we're moving on to coloring our guinea hamster, and I really, like, when I was doing it, I was like, oh, I should make him polka dotted, like, because they do have spotted guinea pigs, and I thought, well, that would be so cute, but then I didn't end up doing it. I don't know, I guess I was just going along, and I kind of lost that thought. I also used those same browns, again, for the paint brushes, and I am coloring these guys the same way, as if the light source is in the top right, so the shadows will be to the bottom left. You can see that on that particular hamster's belly, that it's a little darker underneath his arm. Well, that's because he's reaching across his body, and he would cast kind of a shadow on his own body. For his snout area, I did leave that area white, and I went back in with a warm gray. just to lighten up that part of him and his little ear. Just for some, because I forgot to leave him polka dotted basically. So I was looking for a little color variation. The carpet on this one is also in the cool grays. So I chose to do the other hamster pig in the warm grays, just like we did with the dog before. And then the mouse I will do in the cool grays because it's not going to sit on the floor. It's actually going to be seated on the canvas, kind of up high. So these are, like, they're adorable. So they're really quick and easy to color because there's already that, that sketchy kind of detail in there. So you don't have to get crazy with your coloring. I'm using just 3 colors for pretty much all of them. And again, with that, the one that we did, the warm grays, just like with the dog, I left him, like I used the 4 colors just, for the W7 for the shadows, but he still looks pretty light. For the mouse, I'm just using those same 3 colors that we've been using, the C5, the C3, and the C1. For these little guys, I am giving them little pink noses and ears, and I'm using an R20 to do that. I think I forgot to mention it when I did it with the little dog. His ear is, like the one you can see the inside of his ear, is an R20 as well. For the, what is it called? You guys always tell me you do. Fresnel? What do you call that metal piece on a paintbrush? Is that what it's called? I don't know how you say it. Anyway, I colored those silver as well. And then for these, this paint pot, I did pretty much the same thing I did on the other one in coloring it black. But this one is just a little bit larger, so it's a little easier to see the detail on it. But I mean, for the most part, I used all of the same colors. And then it's got like some little paint drips. So those I colored in completely solid black. I also added some black paint to, the one with the mouse, I forgot, but I'll get it later on. Here's those little pink cheeks and little pink noses and ears. And then for the paint brushes, again, because I have this problem being matchy-matchy, guys. Sorry, not sorry. So I'm doing my paintbrushes red because again, they're going to be photographed together. But red and blue look nice together. So, I mean, I don't have to worry about that. I could have also done orange or yellow and that, would have looked, I think blue looks good with everything. So honestly, I could have done them any color. But so I use those 3 colors of the red. And then this is where I'm going to stamp the sentiment for that second card, because this one I'm going to cut out. Now you could obviously use a rectangle die cut to cut this out. I am just going to trim it and the frame portion on my paper trimmer. So for this particular one, I trimmed it to be 1.5 inches by, I think it was 3 3/4. Now I don't know. Now I don't remember, guys. But you also know I shouldn't be mathing. You guys know that, right? If you come to this channel, you know I shouldn't be mathing. But regardless if it's a die cut or if it is plain, like we did with the first one where we just laid it down on there, you're going to shade them the same way. And it's the same thing with the frame. So I am laying that piece down there just to get a good idea where I should be adding my darkest part. But then I'm only going to end up using 2 of the browns for those 2. All right. No, it was 3 1/4. All right. So it's 1.5 inches by 3 1/4. And then I made my frame 2 inches by 3 1/2. So basically it's got, like 1/8 of an inch all the way around for the frame portion, which is what I'm now coloring brown. Measurements are not my strong suit. And then these have coordinating dies. I will cut them out using those. And I just use pixie tape to hold them in place. Again, if you are a person, you're like, hey, I really like the scene with the dyes. And there's pros and cons to each one. For me, the biggest pro for the 1-layer card is, honestly, it's magical. Like, there's something magic about making a scene look dimensional when it's completely flat. But most people would say that the benefit is probably you don't have to pay anything extra to mail it, because there's nothing sticking up from it. So you can just mail it totally flat. It's also less expensive because you're not paying for the dyes, and you can do it, it just takes more work, pretty much. 1-layer cards are just more, I shouldn't even say more work. It's different work. Whereas here with the dyes, well, we didn't have to mask anything and we can color everything separately. We do have to then make them fit into the scene. So the other benefit to using the dyes is you can add actual dimension and not just perceived dimension. So I'm adding my frame and my little mouse with foam adhesive. So now not only will it look dimensional because of the coloring that we've done, but it will also be dimensional that they can feel it with their hand. And then once I figure out where my little hamster pigs are going to go, then I can add the foam tape to them as well. There's the top portion of both of them, like in the one on the left, it's the paintbrush, and in the one on the right, it's his nose, do overlap that picture. So for those, I did just put a little bit of glue, but the underneath part that is all popped up on foam. So here's how we're going to do the same thing. I should have done this before, if I'm being truthful. I should have done this portion of the shading before I added the guinea hamsters, but I didn't. I forgot about it, so now I have to go back in and redo it. And this is just adding that same kind of drop shadow so that it looks like it's sticking out from the wall. But the other thing that I'm going to do to blend them in is I'm going to color that white outline. If you've ever seen any of my videos, you know this is par for the course for me. If I'm using dyes, I do blend them in. So I'm adding some darker shadows underneath my characters and my little paint pot where it's sitting on the floor, and then blending that out with that C3. And because I did the carpet C3, anything like the sides of the little hamster tushy, the sides of the pot, like I will color all of that in so that it matches the background. With the background, where I've done the ink blending, because I have worked with my alcohol markers for so long, my Copics, I can pretty much eyeball it, and usually I get pretty close to what the actual color is. But I would highly recommend Sandy Allnock's hex chart because it breaks up the markers you have. She has one for Copic, I think for a Hoo-Hoo, one for Olos. Like, they're just so helpful. And they're so affordable. They're like $5 or something. They're so great. Anyway, if I cannot find a good match, I will pull that out and I will just kind of lay it on my background and find one that's a close match. Sometimes it means I do have to layer colors. Like at the top with the mouse, I pulled out the B24, but it was just not, it was good, but it was a little too blue violet and not enough bright blue. So I ended up having to go over it with a B02. So don't think like you can't glaze them over top of each other, because you can to get the perfect color. So I added a little glitter to my paints, and then I also added some highlights to the wet paint portions, as well as the little pots. And then that's it for both cards. So I hope that this gave you some inspiration to make some scene cards, whether you love the dyes or you love the 1-layer. I'd love for you to tell me, leave a comment and let me know which one you love. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.